Hey, is this thing on? Are we recording? Can I get a tech person? Oh, for the love of ed tech.
Today we're talking to Kirk Koennecke, Superintendent and CEO of Indian Hill Exempted Village School District. Hi, Kirk. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
We're so excited to talk to you today. So we always start off, I don't know if you've listened to any of our previous episodes, but we always start off kind of asking our guests to tell us a little bit about their journey into education because everyone's is always so different and varied. So could you tell us a little bit about how you got into education and how you ended up where you are in your current position?
Sure. I grew up and attended secondary school in Kent, Ohio, where Kent State University is. I went to Theodore Roosevelt High School in Kent, Ohio, was a Rough Rider, and I had some amazing teachers there who inspired me and motivated me. And by the time I graduated from high school and was accepted into the Ohio State University, I had decided that I wanted to pursue a career as a teacher and coach. And so I majored in secondary education, social studies, and I worked with the hockey program. And I started to do just those things and had a lot of amazing experiences with teachers and coaches along the way that really helped me as a young man to kind of really solidify this idea of working with children for their success and working with other colleagues for their success. And so I became a high school social studies teacher and coach after earning a master's degree at Miami of Ohio and finishing up some hockey in another lifetime. I started to teach, and I actually went back to Theodore Roosevelt High School and became a teacher at my alma mater and became a coach there. And that started my journey as a professional educator. And I ended up working with some of those same teachers who I looked up to as colleagues before they retired, which was really fascinating. So that was kind of my journey to get into it.
That's really cool. So how'd you end up as superintendent? Like what made you want to take that turn?
You know, actually, in my lifetime, you all may remember when 9/11 occurred. Well, first, of course, there was Columbine was a major incident when I was an educator, and then 9/11. And I was talking with family and friends, and I was watching how school leaders were handling and coping with these events after the fact. And I was discouraged and unhappy. And so I had to ask myself what I was willing to do. And I think that's what motivated me to start looking at education administration and, maybe trying to walk the talk a little bit. And so I went to John Carroll University and got my ed administration degree and started to work as an administrator in the Cleveland area, Richmond Heights, Bedford, and eventually ended up at Barberton, and then worked my way down south here over time as I became a high school principal, Springfield City Schools in Marion, Ohio, and then I got my first superintendent job in Graham Local, which is in Champaign County, Ohio, small rural district. The nice thing about all that is just that I've been able to see the breadth and depth of a lot of different kinds of schools, rural, urban, suburban, small, large, and I hope that that helps me with perspective a little bit. And then, of course, I got lucky and I got to come to Indian Hill, which is the best job in America. So I'm very fortunate.
I love that. Well, and we actually, I guess, got you to talk to us after being in one of your sessions at an AI conference. And we loved your view kind of on AI and what it could do for education, as well as how that ties into attracting talent. And we are in the middle of this teacher shortage, and education doesn't seem as appealing to some people.
You two work in this world, so but AI is not a tool or a supplement. AI is going to be life. It's going to be all around us. It already has been, and for people who have not been paying attention, everything from Alexa to how your garage door opens is being controlled and influenced by AI and has been. Global financial markets, anything you can imagine. So it's not a tool for people to just interact with and for children to just dabble in. It is going to become cultural, a part of the world. And so understanding that it's not a paradigm, it's actually a synthesizer of all previous paradigms of thinking, is really hard for people to wrap their minds around, including mine. It is mind blowing. And I think nationally, this may be a really general answer to the second part of your question, but there's an opportunity and a challenge there. The opportunity is to lean into that and understand how life is going to be for all, and then how you navigate through it. The challenges are the ethical and moral considerations of how we not only govern ourselves as individuals interacting with others, but how groups and organizations are going to govern themselves in that world. That's a lot of big thinking that has to happen, because what's not going to change is that kids need to know critical thinking skills, and the adults who work with them need to understand how to problem solve. Those things are never going to change. There's always going to be new problems and new issues and new things. It's how we go about that and how we navigate through our day that's going to change. And so that's the big challenge and opportunity, I think, at a high level. We could talk about individual examples, but I mean, that's the big challenge.
Yeah. Well, and how does that play into new teachers coming into this arena?
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about the skills and the backpack that a new teacher could bring into. And I'm an optimist, so I like to believe that the next generation is going to come really prepared in a lot of ways, more so than the current my generation. There's an opportunity there, is to learn from young adults who are coming into education. But the challenge is, who wants to teach? And are they going to enter education as a profession knowing these profound changes? We need to double down on investing in educators and promoting this profession as an amazing aspirational profession that can provide so much career satisfaction that hopefully you two feel and I feel. But maybe the media and the public doesn't always cast it that way. They like to cast out the challenges, and people like to be problem admirers in our society, especially through the lens of media in general. And what that does is it hurts schools all across America, and it hurts people who are going to staff schools. And we need people to go into education more now than ever before, not only to cope with AI and how it's going to change the world, but to lead in that world. And who better than teachers to help children cope and understand and navigate over time? So we need to really invest in teachers. We need to learn from them in terms of their tech skills and the knowledge they bring that they've grown up with, and how they manipulate and navigate AI as it evolves. And I think we'll be okay. Now, a lot of people don't think that way. A lot of people think we're going to hit some cliff or doom and gloom or whatever, but I'm an optimist. I believe that teachers are going to adapt and that kids are going to learn. I just don't know if we can do it fast enough. That's really what I talked to you both about before, is this idea of getting faster. Some people don't want to address this world.
Yeah, and I'm curious, do you think part of that is because of just like a lack of understanding within their own world? Do you think it's like a hesitation to kind of step outside the box? Or where do you think, I don't know, where do you think that comes from, or how do you think we address that?
I think anytime people are faced with change, they go through some stages, right, of grief and denial and fear and anger, and ultimately they get to learning. And when you get past denial and fear, then you can lean into learning. And once you get into that learning zone, lots of powerful things happen. And then after you kind of get through the learning, then you start applying and doing. That's where the comfort comes. So the problem is, people like to be comfortable. And in the world, right, people value comfort and safety and security, which ultimately, the more stagnant or static we are, especially when these things are changing so rapidly, it just compounds the fear and the anxiety that you're going to face if you don't learn a little and lean in. And unfortunately, with AI, you can't just dip your toe in. You can do that to learn about ChatGPT. You can dip your toe in to go to a lunch and learn and pick out some things, right, and some tools. You can learn about how these software tools are evolving, but diving into AI as a concept in terms of the world and ethics and governance, and the fact that all prior knowledge ever collected in the world is now at your fingertip and can be processed in moments. That's really a tough thing for people, again, to wrap their minds around. So I think leaning back into things like learning a little bit about philosophy, examining your values, talking about your why, whatever that edge of speak is that we all work with educators every day, posing those types of questions can help people get past fear into a space where they're willing to open up and learn.
Okay, so I guess this maybe will build on that a little bit, because we need the teachers to do those sorts of things so that we can build students who are future ready.
Sure.
Are there specific approaches that you think work to create students that are adaptable and critical thinkers and all of those, I guess we want to call them future ready skills?
Yeah, I think, again, we've all been talking about future ready for so long, right? That I think we need to examine that in our own minds as adults. It's really ready now or ready yesterday. how do we do that, right, to be ready now? And I think it's at Indian Hill, we're very fortunate. We have an innovation coach in each of our buildings. So we have 4 buildings on campus. We serve about 2,300 students, and we have a faculty in each building. And then we have an innovation coach that works with that faculty and our administrators to make sure that we're providing personalized instruction and professional learning for the adults. And we do that in different ways: individual appointments, asynchronous and synchronous professional learning. We have lunch and learns where people can come together. That's social, that's safe. We try to create these safe spaces for learning. And then we also spend a lot of time with our teachers talking about how they can use the skills they have to communicate to mentor and coach children. And really, what we've doubled down on here at Indian Hill is problem based learning. Because while that has nothing to do with the technology tools you might use, it has everything to do with the communication skills that are going to be needed to cope in this AI world. And a lot of schools are doing this, right? They've been talking for years about STEM and projects and problem based and all that stuff. Really, it's those critical skills, again, of communication and problem solving that we're trying to get at. And so we're spending a lot of time investing in that with our faculty so that they can then transfer those things to students, and then, of course, have a more holistic view of how technology interacts with them in their world.
See, you are good at this.
He is good at this.
Yeah, I try to make sure that I do my homework a little bit.
No, I love it. Well, and this is kind of a sidebar, but I just am curious. Your podcast, is it with students?
Yeah, actually, my podcast is with students. I'm going to be meeting with some middle school students today to do my next recording. And then I added this year adults who are partners because, of course, a lot of adults digest podcasts as well. And we wanted to highlight some of our partners. But I really started off with our students. And so I meet with high school and middle school students every month. And, of course, really want people to hear their experiences in their language and how they view school. A lot of our parents graduate from high school and never walk back into a building until they have children, and then they only hear about school from their children and their children's friends. So I think whenever we can put those testimonials out there, it's really important. And I learn 5 new things every time I do that podcast, right? So it's a great experience.
What kinds of topics do you guys talk about? And what's the name of it in case anybody wants to check it out?
So it's the Super Brave EduHero podcast. We call it the EduHero podcast. And my handle is at IH Super Brave if anybody ever wants to follow or digest that or go to our website. But we really have a free-flowing podcast where we ask some general questions of the students in terms of their experience and their perspective on their experience with things like competition, pressure, how they manage and lead themselves, what they think about concepts like leadership and service. And then really what happens is they tell us about what they're involved with along the way in our programs and our people. And I usually like to ask them like what their go-to snack is. And I also like, yeah, and I also like to know like who are the adults that have had a really profound impact on them and why. And I think those are really important things for our adults to hear because we all make some assumptions about what school is like, especially middle school. And these middle school students will tell you what their experience is like and what's important. And I think that helps us all learn about how to make the school experience better for all.
Does that help you when you are hiring new people too?
For sure. I think AI is one thing we talked about when we were all together before, but the types of people who are going to thrive in public schools in the future, right? This idea of, I talk to people all the time of let's not use generalizations and labels and stereotypes to talk about cohorts of kids. We need to get really granular, right? And if we're going to actually talk about personalizing education, we actually have to try to do that for each child and their family so that their journey matters. Their lived experience is something we're all going to pay attention to. And then, of course, there's ways we have to run schools, but master schedules have to change. And the people who can cope and be flexible in those environments, really, to me, it's a more like thinking about what a professor does on a campus at the college level. And how do we have that feel or that look that we all perceive in a middle school? Because when the adults start acting like that and we treat the environment and the campus like that and the schedules like that, we'll actually be helping the children who are navigating their life like that. Right now, we're trying to fit like a square into a round hole, right? And that is nationally, and I'm using a generalization and a stereotype now. Some schools are really working on it and they're finding the answers. And then there are other schools that are still running this old 1880s model and just trying to produce widgets. And widgets are not kids, right?
No.
Kids are not widgets. We're not going to do that at Indian Hill. Our AH Promise Plan is about a promise, and it's to try to make decisions that are about what's best for kids and keeping kids at the center of our decision making. And sometimes that's one child, and sometimes that's all children, but our direction is about that, personalizing the experience. AI helps a child personalize their learning experience for their whole life. And actually, I think teachers are really valuable in that journey. But where organizations fail, the child and their family will still learn. They will still find an outlet and a resource, and that competition has only been growing for public schools. And if people in public schools don't realize it and recognize it, they will not exist. I think we talked before about there's going to be a huge contraction and consolidation of schools across our country over the next 20 to 30 years of our lifetime. And the reason that's going to happen is not necessarily because of property taxes. It's going to happen because of competition for learning and competition for students. I was just talking to one of my new board members, Rob Werfel, who works at Xavier, about how the national landscape has changed for higher ed in terms of enrollment and what they're all doing to adapt and cope. Public schools who aren't thinking about that now are already behind. And if you're not in a place with a lot of resources and a great budget, it's going to be really tough conversation. So we have to prepare for that. And I think the best way to do it, to answer a long-winded response here, hire the right people who can fit that culture and who are willing to think and adapt and be flexible.
Yeah, which I feel like are really great skills that sometimes you're like, how do you instill that? But it's that whole learn through doing.
Teachers like their students to do that every day. And then sometimes when they step out of their role, they don't like to do that as individuals. And I get that. We get that, right? Like,
Yeah.
we all work hard and there's only so much capacity in our brain every day to do something new. But that able to be resilient and cope is going to be really important. And we look for those things when we hire. We look for those themes of people who can not only govern themselves, but lead others and what those values are.
I just love it because, the realm of just education in general, so needs to shift, and it has for a long time. And you just kind of, I don't know, I guess it's always refreshing to hear that there are people that want to create that change, because sometimes it can feel like it's never going to get out of that cycle that was created when public school started, kind of a thing.
I don't know which schools you all worked in, and I know where you're at now, but there are some people who love the schools they're in because they're not changing at all, and they feel left alone, or they like to be on an island. You can't work at Indian Hill that way. So, like, where we are, our culture obviously is unique and different, and everybody has their own. And there's a big difference, though, between, I think, the climate and culture of a building every day when you think about what learning has to happen now and in the future for kids. So here we have world-class teachers that are passionate and focused on how to help prepare kids to lead when they leave Indian Hill. And then we're trying to measure the feedback and input we get from people 4 or 5 years after they've left to see if we prepared them the right way. Not every school culture or climate is going to operate like that every day. And so some people, they love the climate and culture that they're in, and they are not going to leave it because of comfort. And then some people run away from a climate or culture when they feel like they can't work on the things that really matter to them. And I would say to any educator, when they think about AI or technology in the future and working for children, if at the core your why is about helping children prepare for their futures, not you and what you're doing weekly, then you got to be in the right culture, and you got to find the right place where you can thrive with other people who understand that. And I think we're also seeing that in education. I think we're seeing people move not just to the next district over, but to other states and other places, and going to work for different kinds of organizations. That should be a signal to everybody who's not changing. So when I talk about competition, I'm also talking about options. Employees have options. And if you're running an organization full of people and you don't understand that, then you're also missing the boat and not moving fast enough. Because at the end of the day, you've got to thrive with who you have and compete. And compete for children, for their talent. Because these children, they know there are options out there, and their families know that there are options.
If you like this podcast, check out our latest, Minds Over Media, a collaboration between SOIDA and the University of Cincinnati, delving into diverse aspects of media literacy. Uncover the power of media literacy through insightful conversations and gain valuable insight from esteemed scholars and dedicated educators navigating this complex landscape. Check it out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Okay, this can be another total sidebar, but I'm just curious, as a superintendent, what advice would you give to a teacher who wants to be in like a culture like yours, but say has no connections, knows no one? How do you get in? And I'm only asking this because I feel like this was my reality So I started looking for jobs in Ohio in 2007, which was during that time of
hard times,
cutting costs, whatever. And I was teaching, in Indiana at this time. And it's kind of like, I know no one in Ohio, but I know eventually I need to move to Ohio if I want to marry my husband.
It's all his fault.
It is all his fault. And so, but that always was kind of like that big hurdle of like, I wasn't living in the state to be able to sub and make connections. And you're just trying to, I don't know, get something, a bite, And so I'm just curious from your perspective, like what advice would you offer people who might be feeling that frustration?
Well, from an HR perspective, this is something I've always been interested in. And again, I've always been very fortunate and lucky, but I would say getting a job is a job, right?
Mm-hmm.
As you learned.
Yeah, absolutely.
The best way to go after a job is to be persistent and aggressive to get the job you want. So I value when someone is persistent and aggressive and wants to build a relationship with Indian Hill. And I have had people who have come to us for years who have tried to get into Indian Hill. And we're very fortunate that we can have competitive pools. But even in other places where I worked before and was hiring as a principal or assistant principal or coach or athletic director, I wanted people who showed me that interest and who said, I've done my homework about your culture and I want in. And I think one of the things that I'm always disappointed with is when someone tries to get a job and they haven't done their homework and they haven't learned about the culture and they haven't tried to build a relationship. And then, what happens is as you're interviewing or screening them, you start to worry more about what are their intentions and motives. Do they just like the salary and benefits, or what is their why? So when someone's coming at you and they're aggressive and persistent, they usually show you their why and their values as they're coming in the door. The other thing is hiring has changed. The speed of hiring has changed. So anybody who is hiring, who's not using LinkedIn or Instagram and posting a job and actually trying to recruit people to build a pool, is missing the boat, because I'm going to go out and actually find the person before someone else does. And I'm going to try to make their user experience as easy as possible to get through our process to get hired and join our team, to outcompete everybody else around me. I don't know if every organization is willing to change and think like that. I think a lot of larger school districts are kind of like a big ship that kind of turns slowly, right? Our job is to be like a nimble speedboat. Like, we are looking at how do we get you and onboard you as quick as possible. And in order to do that, we got to recruit and talk to you quicker to get to your why and your values and kind of meet you where you are, because that's what the next generation wants. Oh, and by the way, Gen Z, if they can't apply for a job in about 3 clicks, they're gone. And by the way, they can also apply for about 4 jobs at the same time because they're just so used to doing it. They're doing it on their phone. If they can't do it on their phone with you, they may never come work for you. So my mentality is I want to find you. I don't want you to find me. But if you're that person going to look, you need to know all that. And then you need to be on LinkedIn and Instagram, and you need to reach out and you need to DM somebody or ask them for their phone number and say, or can I drop by and meet you tomorrow? Because I'm so excited about the opportunity to just talk to you and introduce myself. And don't be afraid to do that, because that's how people get with the right culture. And I think a lot of people just don't know what they don't know about going after a job. And so even helping mentor them to get a job or go about a job search is a whole other industry.
Yeah. And it's like you said, it's changed so much. And so, navigating that, I always wonder too if kids come out of college knowing how to do that, depending on where they went, because I know some schools have good programs where they kind of run through those scenarios of interviewing and creating resumes and different things like that. But I also know that that's not available for everyone. So
mock interviews are really important. And one great thing we all learned because of the pandemic, just like we're doing right now, is you can use platforms like a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams meeting or even a podcast. You can actually practice, right? And you can interact with people in different ways. If I was going to try to get a job as a teacher today in a small suburban district, I would probably not only send my resume through an email, I would probably try to DM the person who I thought was in charge, and then I would probably try to invite them to a Zoom call and see if they accepted. Whether they ever did or not, I would just want them to see that I was taking all those steps because I want in, and I think how to help people with that is really fascinating. But also this generation, no matter whether they go to college or not, they're learning that a little bit. Whereas maybe when I was coming up as an undergrad way, way back, it took like a head coach or a teacher to say to me, what do you know about us? Why are you here? And I had to learn the first 2 or 3 times before I was successful getting the next job, because I failed in so many interviews. And I think that's the other thing, you got to be prepared to fail.
Yeah. And I don't know, I guess too, the whole a job is a job kind of thing. It's a step. And I think too, sometimes, I don't know, that can hold people back because it may not be what they want. So they're hesitant to take it. But I think you never know. And I've learned that you never know like where those connections will lead you.
Well, that's the other thing about the kids coming through our schools now and the adults we hire that I think everybody needs to understand, because of the ability to do a lot of things with software and electronics and technology that we never had in schools before. Not only does the physical structure of a schedule and campus have to change, The way we treat employees has to change. We need to understand that many employees are not going to stay with us for 30 or 35 years. They don't want to. They actually want to be 10 or 11 different things in their lifetime. And there's nothing wrong with that. So this idea of some generational bias of these kids don't have the same work ethic, or these kids, they don't want to put in the time and the effort, all those mantras that my parents used to talk about and I talk about, right? We have to get by that generational bias and look a little bit more at what do our employees need to thrive. And in the time that they're with us and we invest in them, our goal should be about retaining them to sustain our culture. And if we can't retain them, how do we make the experience at that part of their journey with us so important for the kids that maybe we extend it a little bit? And we used to do that traditionally with things like salary schedules and bonuses and benefits and whatever over the course of 35 years. Now we should be thinking about doing that with individual contracts and terms and incentives. And how do we get you in and keep you? Because these people are going to grow up and want to be 8 or 10 things. They may not want to be a teacher in your classroom at your district for 30 years. They might go and teach for a long time, just not with you all the time, even in really great environments. And I like to think we have a really great environment for employees overall, but I also know that keeping them is a task, and it's changing. And especially with the new generations that we've been hiring the last 10 years, they have different goals. And so we need to thrive with them because we can't really thrive separate from them. We have to hire. So we all have to change.
Change for the better.
It's just so refreshing for me to hear it because I've worked places where it was like, you're lucky to have this job. We're doing you a favor by allowing you to teach here. And it's just nice to hear a different perspective.
Well, if you do a nice job where you are, and you generally feel that you are respected by your colleagues and peers and leadership, most people can be happy. If you're in an environment where that comes across as a red flag to you, you should be polishing a resume and DMing someone to get out, right? Like that's just reality. And engagement with employees is something that organizations have to work on because that feedback's really important. But when you as an individual get feedback like that maybe this isn't the right culture, you got to really ask yourself about your values and where you want to be. And the thing about AI with governance and values and ethics and morals is that all of these questions we're going to be examining as individuals and in organizations for kids so much more dramatically and regularly than maybe we ever did before. Like, maybe the three of us would have to take a philosophy class as an undergrad to be talking about these things every day. Now we're going to be talking with kids about moral and ethical governance all the time because you're not going to have to even create a research paper without, you're going to be able to snap your fingers, and then you're going to have to move past all that research that's at your fingertip and talk about, is what you just did okay, and why, and how could it be used, and who might be implicated or impacted by it, and then how do we feel about that, and then what kinds of leadership will that take, and again, that's why we have to get faster. Those conversations are powerful and big-headed conversations, and we need to prepare children to have them, and adults need to be willing to have them. That's why teachers are so important. Teachers can have these conversations. And if they're equipped with the skills of communication and critical thinking, they can double down to help kids understand these conversations. And if you don't want to have them, boy, I really am going to be fearful and scared for you as an adult because I know the kids are going to be having them with someone. I'd rather have them with our employees than anybody else. That's the way we kind of look at it.
Great conversation. Is there anything that we did not talk about that you really want to say to the world?
I appreciate what you do and in organizations like yours where we're talking about these things that matter and how everybody can help create a kind of a network of support for educators to navigate this changing world that has changed so rapidly. it is a major task, but it's also how to provide service to other people. And we need to provide that service to teachers, to administrators. When I think about the less experienced and younger leaders that I've hired, that there's such a weight to those decisions, because my job is really to help develop other leaders. And I want them to be successful. And to me, loyalty is not allowing others around you to fail on your team. Like, that's the definition. So I think organizations like yours, you all have that kind of value set too, where it's like, how do we help others to not fail and succeed and be equipped? That's what I care about. And I think so many people like you two care about. We need to continue to build that network of support for people in any way we can, so that people look at public school education as an awesome career opportunity, and that we're working with the best kids in America. The more we can do that, the better for everybody to adapt and thrive.
Couldn't have said it better. Thanks for listening to our For the Love of EdTech podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation today and learned something you can use with your own students. You can find the show notes, resources, and more at www.fortheloveofedtech.org.
For Love of EdTech is produced by SOITA, the Southwestern Ohio Instructional Technology Association, in partnership with Think TV and CET, the local PBS stations in Dayton and Cincinnati.